Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolfuk again. Wolfuk the other way at the 30, the 40. Wolfuk to midfield. Miles Wolfuk with the pick. The heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory. Williams is the running back next to Howe. Play action. Howe will now lob it down the near side. Newsom with a man all over him. Pins the ball against the back of the defender and brings it in. He'll get a first down at the 3. Howe, pump fake to the right. Now he's going to run to the left. Howe at the 5. Takes the shot. Pinballing off the chains for the touchdown. Howe showing the toughness for 6. Cardinals down 4, 35-31. May has the shotgun snap. Pressure coming. Rolls to the right. Throws to the end zone. Touchdown! Touchdown, Antoine Green! 16 seconds to go. No flag. Snapping it off the 8-yard line. May pulls it, tries to roll it apart. Now he's going to throw it and score! Throws it to Payson in the end zone for the touchdown. May thrown it left-handed. Was walking out on the run and threw it left-handed. Northfield it at the 26. Heading in the far side. Theo at the 35. Theo, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Theo, he's going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Vlog podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys as always. And today, a recruiting edition of the podcast here to start you guys off. We will have 2 editions of the podcast here tonight that we will be doing, but we'll start you off with a recruiting edition of the podcast because we got to go back to last Thursday and talk about an in-state flip that Carolina was able to complete of one of the state's best interior one of the state's best offensive tackles, a guy that really just helps Carolina along the offensive line, an area that they sorely need help. So we'll get into that. We'll get into where this offensive line class stands as a whole. And it should be a pretty short edition of the podcast for you guys before we get out of here and get prepared to talk about the Charlotte game. But as I mentioned, Carolina with a huge flip in state as they flip J.B. Shabazz, the 4-star offensive tackle from Tennessee. They flip him on Thursday morning. He was committed to Tennessee since back on July 11th. That was after a month of official visits that he took everywhere but Carolina. Carolina was one of the spots that he did not take an official visit to, but he was on campus for the season opener for the Tar Heels against TCU. And even with the performance on the field, it was clearly enough to convince him to flip. Shabazz, the number 247 overall prospect in the class, the number 22 offensive tackle, according to 24/7 Sports composite player rankings. He hails from East Forsyth High School in Kernersville, North Carolina. He spent the last 2 seasons there in the midst of his senior season, of course, right now, after spending his first 2 seasons at Oak Grove High School in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So this is a nice flip for Carolina to get an in-state prospect rated as the number 13 player in the state of North Carolina, and for the Tar Heels to go out and get him and not having hosted him for an official visit is a really big move. And especially with him being at the game against TCU, you know, we were kind of wondering what type of effect that would end up having on some of the recruits that were on campus, including some of the guys that were already committed to the class. Well, I think it shows, and you follow some of the comments that a lot of guys were making after the fact, that really didn't matter as much. And maybe this is one of those scenarios where J.B. Shabazz looked at the offensive line for Carolina and said, they're probably going to need me sooner rather than later. There's probably a good opportunity that I could play here. I think that certainly weighs into it. But I think the other part of it was the environment that Carolina fans brought in that first half. Hopefully that's something that can be sustained throughout the Bill Belichick era. And hopefully that's something that we see more of as we move forward this year. And of course, in the years down the line when Shabazz is on campus. Carolina, I think one of the things that's key here is they got to make sure that they continue to check in on him, make sure that they are continuing to try to get him on campus as much as possible, and visit him as much as they possibly can, because there are, a lot of national schools that are after him. I mean, you look at, Ohio State took an official visit there, took an official visit to Penn State, South Carolina, of course, having a good start to their season. That was the school that he was predicted to land at by many early on in his recruitment. So you would expect that those teams are going to continue to push for him. Same thing with Tennessee. And also in-state, NC State could be a team that pushes for him as well. So Carolina's just got to stay on top of it. They got him to flip. Now it's about holding on to him. When you turn on the film of J.B. Shabazz, there's a lot to like about his game. I mean, first of all, 6'6", 315 pounds. So again, we've talked about Carolina wanting to go out and find the guys that have the measurables. Well, they sure have done that. And it feels like this is another one of those guys that fits exactly to a T what Carolina's looking for from their offensive lineman. He's got the height. He's got the weight already on him. And they're hoping that he's going to be a guy that can come in and potentially contribute early for them when he gets here next year. He has heavy hands, definitely something that I think is very effective, allows him to knock guys back pretty easily when he first gets his hands on them, and plenty of upper body strength, which makes it tough for opposing defensive linemen or linebackers when he does get his hands on them. In the run game, I thought he was actually pretty good. Some of the other scouting reports really questioned him as a run blocker, but I thought, some of the tape that you saw from him, and again, it's a highlight film, so yeah, you're really going to see the best reps. But I thought he had some moments where he showed a little bit of that mean streak. Maybe it needs to be more consistent, but I thought in the run game, he was a guy that was really a mauler and, was able to drive guys back off the line of scrimmage pretty easily and pile up the pancakes by tossing guys down to the ground. I thought he also looked pretty solid in pass protection, although you will see guys that are a little squattier or a little speedier off the edge that could give him problems. It makes sense. We've seen that with these types of offensive tackles before, so it wouldn't shock me if that's something that you see. But I mean, yeah, the thing is that he's got to find that level of violence that you got to have for an offensive lineman. You want to see it a little more consistently for him. But if you do end up seeing that a little more consistently, then the sky's really the limit for this young man, because I think you look at his lateral movement, I thought that was really pretty solid, especially for a guy of his size. Some of these guys at this, size and weight usually will rely on their physicality a little too much. The thing is that for him, without that physicality being consistent, it means that other areas of his game do have to be better. And I think you see that when you turn on his film. So I really like what you see from him. I think, this is a guy that the staff feels like, looking at him compared to some of the other guys that they brought in this class, that he's a guy that can make an early impact for them. They're looking for guys that are going to be able to make early impacts. And I think that's certainly something, along the offensive line that is very capable of happening. I mean, you look at some of the guys that, Carolina has already rolled out there this year. Aiden Buchanan started in the opener. Didn't see him in the game against Charlotte the other day. But Carolina is searching for answers along that offensive line. They have rotated a lot of guys in early in the season. Part of that is, of course, due to the injuries that Carolina has with guys like Christo Kelly and Austin Blasky. But it also has to do with the fact that the tackles haven't necessarily played all that well. They haven't graded out well. That's an area that Carolina needs to be better, especially at left tackle. I think the right tackle job is, really somewhat settled at this point. I think they feel pretty confident in that. But that left tackle spot, I think, is an area that they really don't feel confident in right now. They feel like they've got to find some answers there. And, going into next year, a guy like J.B. Shabazz, if he can show that he fits on that left side, which is where he plays at the high school level, then maybe he is the guy that could end up being the future of that position for Carolina there in the years moving forward. You look at the rest of the offensive line that Carolina has here, the rest of the offensive linemen in the class, and Carolina's built a really strong offensive line class. I think you look at J.B. Shabazz, clearly the highest rated prospect out of that group, the only one ranked inside of the top 300 and another headliner for Carolina to this class. He is, believe it or not, the highest ranked in-state player as well that Carolina has landed over a guy like Trayshawn Ruffin, Xavier Griffin-Haynes. Both of those guys rated lower than he is. So a nice pickup in-state for Carolina, as we mentioned, but also along the offensive line. But you also got, a guy just ranked outside of the top 500 in Will Conroy. There's a good chance that he can make a jump as well. And that's a guy that Carolina is recruiting to play the center spot. And that's going to be key because you're seeing the issues that Carolina is having right now based off of the fact that they did not recruit a center really these last few years under Mac Brown. I think that's one of the things that you can't really put on Bill Belichick. You got to think Carolina went into the transfer portal to get their last two starting centers, and then they had to do the same thing during the wintertime when they went out and got Christo Kelly there in order to move Austin Blasky over to right guard. But, Carolina went out and got Corey Gaynor. They went out and got Austin Blasky out of the portal, and I think they felt like they can keep doing this moving forward. Now they've run into a problem with the injury to Christo Kelly, the injury to Austin Blasky. Both of those guys shelved right now. It's left them without a legitimate starting center, and that has really caused some issues in these last couple of games. We'll talk about that, of course, more later on tonight. That's been really the main focus of the offensive line struggles for Carolina, and so they're hoping that Will Conroy will be able to come in there and settle that down. Zion Smith starting to get a little more hype. Starting to climb some of those rankings, now ranked inside of the top 600, a guy that on the interior of the offensive line, I think is going to be a really nice fit for Carolina. I love the physicality that he brings. So that really is going to be a nice addition for Carolina there in an area where they've got some veteran guys and they might need someone like Zion Smith to step up here sooner rather than later for Carolina with a lack of talent really there. Nick Fiamura, a guy that was ranked, well outside of the top 1,000, now ranked inside of that top 1,000. That's another guy in this class that I like. Mason Wilhelm, Eli Raquel, all, guys that are going to be important pieces for Carolina in this class and guys that they're hoping they can develop pretty quickly here, along with some of the guys that they brought in this past freshman class. So I think this class, you look at it, Carolina's got the numbers. There's no question about that. There are some guys that they still have to figure out where exactly they're going to play them, mainly Raquel and Mason Wilhelm. I think Raquel, as we've said many times here on this podcast, is a guy that really trends well for me. I know he was listed as an interior offensive lineman. I think he fits much better at the offensive tackle position, a lot more athletic than I think people give him credit for. Wilhelm, I feel like, is a guy that probably fits more on the interior of the offensive line. And then Fiamura, it's good to see him sort of start making the climb here. And, playing in the state of Massachusetts, it's always hard to really be discovered. There aren't a lot of camps that come over in that area of the country throughout the year. And so it's really hard to get on some of these recruiting radars. But I'll be interested to see, once you get past the senior year, how does he continue to trend? Is he a guy that, based off of his senior year tape, really starts to climb some of the rankings? Because that could be another guy that, very similar to what we saw with Aiden Buchanan making a climb into the starting lineup this year. Aiden Banfield doing the exact same thing the year before as a true freshman under Mac Brown. Could Nick Fiamura be that guy that we aren't necessarily talking a lot about right now, but could potentially be a starter on the offensive line alongside some of these other guys that could be playing pretty significant roles for Carolina? So credit to this offensive line staff, Will Friend and his crew doing a really good job of putting together a strong class and doing a great job of flipping JB Shabazz and getting a headliner for that offensive line class and getting one that now, for Carolina, hopefully is going to be a guy that can early enroll, potentially get on campus and make an impact early on for an offensive line group that sorely needs it. As I mentioned, we'll be talking a lot more about the offensive line. We'll be talking plenty about all the other areas of this Tar Heel team later on tonight on the edition of the podcast that we have coming up for you as we recap the Charlotte game. That will start at 8 p.m. on these same networks. So make sure, or on these same channels. So make sure that you guys are following along with us here. Leave your comments. We would greatly appreciate that as well. We will, of course, throughout the year be keeping you up to date on everything that's going on recruiting wise. Again, the only reason why we did this on Monday, people might be questioning, this news happened on Thursday. Why did it take until Monday to get a podcast up? Well, unfortunately, with, the work schedule this year, it just didn't allow for us to have any time to get this in. I am calling high school football this year for WFNZ in Charlotte. I'd love for you guys to tune in and listen to that every Friday, Hornets games permitting, allowing us to do those high school games. And so that's a really cool venture that I've gotten into this year, but it does sort of limit us in terms of time to be able to get on here and do certain editions of the podcast. So that's why it took until Monday to get this one up, but we'll try to be more timely when it comes to recruiting news that comes out for Carolina. There are some other rumors that are floating around for the Tar Heels right now. I know there is a 2027 four-star cornerback that Carolina is close to flipping. That's a guy that also could potentially reclassify. So that would be a huge addition for Carolina, especially if they can go into Miami's backyard and potentially pick up this flip. That would be massive. So certainly a lot of stuff to keep an eye on here as we go throughout this year. This should be, a pretty crazy season considering the way that it started for Carolina. There could be a lot of recruiting impacts that happen throughout the year. So we'll be keeping you up to date on all of that. Going back to the edition of the podcast that's coming up, make sure you guys check it out wherever you get your podcast as well. And make sure you guys are giving us your comments on what you thought of the Charlotte game. When we do that podcast later on tonight, we'd love to hear from you because me and Josh, we're a little bit different on where we are after the Charlotte game. Certainly one of those games that wasn't the most entertaining that we've ever seen from Carolina, but we're going to break it all down for you, make it entertaining for you over the course of about an hour. So make sure that you guys are tuning in for that edition of the podcast. Of course, have to direct you to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. Recap of the game is up there for you guys to check out. That's just my takeaways from the game. So go give that a read. I think it certainly will land home with some people. Other people may feel a little bit different about what they saw out there from Carolina, and we want to hear your opinions. So make sure that you guys always leave those for us, but would greatly appreciate if you go give that a read. We're having some trouble right now with our Facebook groups in terms of sharing into them. That's why if you're someone that is used to seeing our content in those groups and you haven't been seeing it lately, that's why. So make sure you go over to the Facebook page, like that Facebook page, so that whenever we do post an article, it'll be right there in your feed. The other way to do it, really the best way to do it, is to go over to Twitter at HeelToughBlog. Go over there, hit the follow button, and then immediately hit that notifications button right next to it. Turn on all notifications. The only things that we do on there, the only things that we post on there are our articles, or our podcast editions, and some of the stuff we'll repost afterwards. Other than that, there is nothing else that goes on that feed. So that is all of our content direct to consumer. So make sure that you guys go on there and check that out. Give us a follow. We would greatly appreciate that. The other thing, of course, that we have been pushing is go over to the YouTube page. If you are someone that is watching on YouTube, be sure to give us a subscription. We would greatly appreciate that. That would really help us as we try to grow our YouTube numbers on that side of things. So that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Make sure you join us later tonight for the Charlotte recap. But thank you guys for listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.